Hey guys, it's Nick. Welcome to another episode of T-Minus 365. In today's episode, I'm going to be covering one of the largest concerns with new commerce, which is liability. I'll be giving you guys a simple formula to help you understand and determine whether or not a monthly or annual contract makes more sense for your customers, and also be giving you some guidance as far as verbiage I would put into the contract to help protect you and ultimately, again, reduce your liability with these new commerce contracts. I would preface this by saying if you don't have a fundamental understanding of new commerce, like the different terms and the prices between the terms, then this video might not make sense to you. So I would recommend going to check out my deep dive video first and then popping back over here afterwards. With that though, let's start off with that formula. I think a good question to answer here when you think about monthly versus annual is this difference in price. And so what if I actually told you that you could be spending less over a year period for monthlies, even with that 20% baked in, than you do with annuals? That is something that we want to break down here with a simple equation that I wrote here, formula, which will help you determine this for customers. Now, this is something that I would use only on customers that have a lot of move-add seat changes per month, a lot of variance in that billing where they have been experiencing the flexibility in CSP today, not somebody who's very stagnant with their seat counts. That's something that you should readily just push into annuals because of the price change. With this though, when we're taking a look at A versus B, on the A side of the house, we're looking at a trailing 12-month license count quantity that you have for customer subscriptions. You're multiplying that by your product monthly pricing, then you're multiplying that by 12 to determine, the total cost of A, basically what you would be on monthly for a whole year. Now with B, you're looking at your max quantity, so you're taking the max quantity over the past 12 months. You're adding in a little bit of a cushion here by taking the max, multiplying it by 10%, so you have a little bit of a cushion in your seat counts. You can choose whether or not to do that, and then you can multiply that by the product annual pricing times 12, and then you'll determine your basic comparison here, which is to say that if B is less than or equal to A, then you should definitely be going annual. Otherwise, you need to consider what monthly might look like. So a higher example here, as far as what I can describe from a real life example, be looking at a customer purchasing business premium. And so over the past 12 months, their average quantity and seat count is 26. We're going to go ahead and multiply that by 2640, which is what business premium will be at monthly rates come July, and then multiply that by 12 to reach 8236 roughly as far as the cost goes, and that's all USD. For B here, we're taking our max quantity over the trailing 12 months, which was 30. We're adding in our cushion here, so it's 3 seats, 30 times 10%. And then we're multiplying that by 22, which is the cost of BP on annuals, and then we're multiplying that by 12. And the interesting thing that you'll notice here is that business premium annuals is actually $87.12, which is roughly about $500 more than you would actually pay with the monthlies, going based off of your average. So it's really interesting to point that out, and I think if you can depict this to the customer, it's more digestible for them to go with monthlies, and the benefits of that obviously being the flexibility, and for you as the MSP, it's the reduction in your liability. I'm sure the customer would like that as well too, to be able to have flexibility upon cancellations and things of that nature. Now, even if we didn't use the cushion here, we still have a price point here of $79.20. So that's saying that we didn't add these extra 3 seats. So that is actually less than A, but you got to think of it in the sense of roughly $300 difference that you're choosing to maybe absorb for the flexibility and reduction in liability. So it's again another factor you could consider when you're taking a look at the contract terms here themselves. There's some other asterisks obviously as well too that you have to take into note. The first obviously of which is the customer growth rate. So again, if they're stagnant, probably makes more sense to do annuals and just tack on monthlies here or there, but if they're very much in flux with their seat counts, it could still make more sense to do the monthlies. The second thing to note here is that we're assuming that you hit your high water mark in seat count near or at the beginning of the term, meaning that with annuals, you could start at a lower seat count and slowly work your way up over that term commitment, and so your financial obligation there would not necessarily be as high if you incremented and hit your high water mark midterm, like 6 months afterwards versus at the very beginning. So it's another thing to take in consideration as far as the variable goes. The third thing, which is something I think is a fluid situation with Microsoft trying to solve, which is the fact that there's a certain amount of SKUs that are only annual commits, meaning that you cannot purchase a monthly. These are not your high-level base plans like Business Premium, Business Standard, E3. They're more like your add-on plans like Business Voice and Exchange Online Plan 1, things of that nature. So you do have to take that into consideration too. Hopefully longer term here that won't be a factor and we'll have multiple commits per product, but there's about 60 products right now that have that factored in. So with that, I think that your ultimate determination here when you're going with your customers to pivot outside of this strict formula is to say that you determine your watermark ultimately of the number of employees that you have that'll be mostly full-time workers able to commit to that annual, and then you will tack on monthlies as well too to supplement that for seasonal workers and things of that nature. Ultimately, when a new employee is added or somebody's added that needs a license, you can evaluate at that time whether that should contribute to your watermark, your annuals, or they should just be adding a monthly because it's more cost effective. That way also whenever you hit your renewal dates, you can evaluate what your new base mark should be based off the employees that have full-time licenses and things of that nature. So this is just another way to break this down. Again, I think a lot of people are focusing on sticker shock. We should actually be running the numbers on customers with a lot of move ad changes. So now that we've broken this down, I think the other comparison that you have to look at is obviously your contract terms with the customers. And so I'm not a lawyer, so I can't exactly provide you guys with the boilerplate legal jargon that you would need for the customer, and that is unfortunate, but I can provide you some of the recommendations that I would go with, of which I would include in my contract terms ultimately to help protect you and again reduce liability. So first and foremost, I would have verbiage about committing annually or paying the 20% premium. I think you have to be really strict on this, and I think it has to be black and white that you put this in there, because if they don't absorb that liability, you're ultimately doing them. That puts you at a great risk, and there's a multiplier effect when you think about that across all of your customers. So I think this has to be something that they have to agree to, and keep in mind they get no better direct. They have to pay 20% premium if they want the monthly flexibility as well. So if that's a question, then you can say, hey, you're going to get the same, and your billing's going to be a little bit disparate because you're not getting that all from me. You're actually getting something from a different vendor, which is kind of an inconvenience, really. The other piece here is there's no decrements or cancellation throughout the term. This is another one I would be really strict about. There is this whole 72-hour window of prorated cancellations at the time of purchase or increment that you have as far as Microsoft rules go. But I think if you try to follow that model, you're going to have a lot of operational overhead, and it's just going to get really hairy and complex to try to keep up with. And it's going to confuse not only yourself, but the customer as well too. So I'd be just strict and say that there's no decrements or cancellations midterm. We have to think about renewal dates, and then we decrement at that date for a new watermark that we go back into a new contract for. Third one here, seats added mid-month prorate and co-terminate. So this is universal whether or not you're on monthly or annual, just specifying what they're going to see if they increment in mid-month. It'll be a prorated charge for that mid-month, and then they'll absorb the whole quantity, and that quantity will co-terminate for one subscription. So just to have some language around that so they can know what to expect. Some products only available for annual commit. We touched on this, but until Microsoft potentially solves for this, this is going to be a factor. It's not necessarily something that you have to worry about the initial contract you have with the customer, simply because you'll know that at that point in time what products are only at annual terms. So it's more so the long-term commitment as far as with the customer. 6 months down the line, they have business standard today. 6 months down the line, they want business voice. Well, that's only an annual commit, and they have to know that it's on a per product basis of which these commitment terms can lie, and they have to absorb that as well too. So I think it's just another good thing to call out. Notifications for renewals. This is something I would bake into your operations in the sense of giving them 30, 14, and 7 days notice of renewal, or something along those lines when their renewals are coming up for subscriptions on their contracts. This is likely a big pain point that's going to come just from the headache of different renewals per subscription. So I think it's good to get ahead of it because you only have that small window of time to adjust their quantities before they're on the hook for that next term. It's not as big of a deal with monthlies, but with annuals, you're going to be committed for that full annual 72 hours after the renewal date. So it's good to take notice that they only have these window or the small window of time, but they're going to get notifications about that as well. The last one here, the commitment timelines are on a per subscription basis. I think it's good to call out the per subscription basis part. You may have a customer that's on BP monthly and BP annual to stratify the costs like I talked about earlier, and that's two separate subscriptions for the same product that could potentially also have different renewal dates depending on when you purchase them. So it's good to note that whenever you go through NCE, you have these commitment terms, and you might compensate for this with different contracts in your PSA tool per subscription. Seems very cumbersome, which is I recommend that you try to get them converted on multiple subscription terms on the same date. And ideally on the first of the month is another good recommendation, just to align with common standards for billing, especially with what you're doing with your PSA tool. But just note, for them, they need to agree to the renewal date on a per subscription basis. They're going to be obligated for that single subscription, if you will. So those are all the recommendations I wanted to provide. I may have missed something, or obviously throughout your businesses you may have good recommendations. So please comment those below. Love to get your feedback on this. But otherwise, if you have not yet already, like or subscribe to the channel. And I hope that this has provided you guys some good guidance on reducing NCE liability. Thanks guys. Have a good day.